Hi, I'm Christy Wellborn, and you're listening to EstesParkRadio.com. I would like to welcome back John Meisner with the Estes Park Archives. In our last segment, we were talking about the Stanley Museum fire. And can you give us just a little bit of a synopsis, and then we'll go ahead and finish with it?
Sure. In 1911, there was a big explosion at the Stanley Hotel. And one of the women who was most seriously injured was named Elizabeth Wilson, most likely. But one of the interesting things is her name may be incorrect, and that may be one of the reasons why the Stanley itself is having trouble finding out any more information about her, what happened after the explosion. So we went around and we got any newspaper account in northern Colorado that was published. And as I was saying last time, the Fort Collins papers call her Elizabeth Leitenberger and say that she's from near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Some of the newspaper accounts, and these come from Berthoud, they come from Greeley, they come from Boulder, they come from Denver, they come from Lyons, which is always a good paper for us to look in because it's so close. Estes Park didn't have a paper at that time, and that's what makes this so difficult. If we had a paper, none of this would be a problem, I doubt.
And you said she was a chambermaid?
She was a chambermaid, and she worked at the Stanley, and according to the articles, had worked there since it opened, so since 1909. Some of the articles refer to her as the head chambermaid, which would again make me believe, and some of the other people that are involved in this think, maybe she was not just a young woman, but maybe up in her 30s or 40s. Because we have to start making some kind of guesses as to who she was, how old she was she married or not married, when we start looking for her on things like the U.S. Census or in directories from her hometown. And that's where this has proved so difficult. If she is from the area around Philadelphia, and some of these newspaper articles say specifically Lancaster, Pennsylvania, then we should go to the Lancaster newspapers and find out if it's a big deal, if this was such a big explosion and she was hurt so badly, probably she'd be that newspaper account will be picked up there, or they'd be following how she's doing. So that's the first thing we did, and we contacted the Lancaster Historical Society, which is about 80 miles from Philadelphia. It's just west of Philadelphia. It's in Pennsylvania Dutch country. I think there's a fairly large Amish and Mennonite population there, and they have a very good historical society. So we said, okay, here's our problem. We'd like to find out if this woman really existed, Elizabeth Wilson. So that process started about a week ago, and it's been exciting because they found some articles about her, and they themselves are confused in their own paper about who she is and what her name is and whether she really is from that area. So they say, we're getting these reports of a woman named Elizabeth Wilson, who's a chambermaid at the Stanley Hotel, the very famous hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. We can't find her in any of our directories. We don't know anyone in town that knows her, but it's possible that she lives out in a neighboring area. The interesting thing that they do say, though, is that the manager of the Stanley at that time, whose name was Alfred Lamborn, was well known in that area because he had previously worked or managed a hotel in the Lancaster area in Pennsylvania. And that hotel was something called the Calico. And another very good hotel, very nice hotel in the area. And so it turns out that we know as little about Alfred Lamborn as we do about Elizabeth Wilson. So then now we have a kind of a two-pronged approach. Did Alfred Lamborn know this woman Elizabeth? Had she worked for him previously as a chambermaid? And so when he came out to manage the Stanley Hotel, he brought some of the staff along. Why would a woman from Pennsylvania come all the way out to Estes Park, Colorado to work? And also a maid's job, although again, head chambermaid may be a significant position. Wouldn't there be people qualified more locally in the Colorado area? I'm sure Denver would have had head chambermaids that could have come up and worked up at the Stanley.
You'd think.
You'd think. So what's the connection there, and is the connection Alfred Lamborn? So Alfred Lamborn, who was the manager of the Stanley Hotel from 1909 until 1922, that's about all we know about him, is that he was the manager from 1909 to 1922. We have a few hints about where he worked before that. His obituary said he worked for the Pullman Company, which was associated with the railroad. Jim Pickering has written some about him and says that he worked for a hotel in Atlantic City, which is probably true. We're finding some mentions in the late 1800s, early 1900s of him working at an ice rink, managing an ice rink in Philadelphia. And then again, in 1904, this advertisement in the Washington Post newspaper that says, write for information about the Hotel Cocalico that's in just outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in a town called Ephrata, Pennsylvania. That's 1904. So our mission now is to find out how long Alfred Lamborn was in Pennsylvania and working at this hotel. The hotel burned down in 1921, so there's not very good records about it. And then find out if he was friends or knew this woman, Elizabeth Wilson. That's one approach, and we hope that pans out and gives us something. To find Elizabeth Wilson in any kind of anything, newspaper mention, telephone listing, and find out her friends, and if she has family, and if she, again, wasn't killed in this explosion but lived and went on and had children, got married and had children, can we find any descendants? We've had more luck finding Alfred Lamborn's descendants, and there's some great-grandchildren that live in South Carolina. And so again, this is just early on in this process, but I'm in contact with them. They have photographs, they have family history. They'll know, I think, a little more about the path that Alfred Lamborn took before he came out here to Colorado. And so he had a daughter that may have been the same age as this Elizabeth Wilson, so maybe his daughter knew her, and maybe that's the reason she came out so far from home to work out here. But the other possibility is the Stanley Hotel itself, or our website, can start putting this out as help us. Here's a woman whose first name is clearly Elizabeth, who clearly was from the Pennsylvania area, who had a bad accident in 1911. Are you related to her? Do you know, in your family histories, have you ever been told around the Thanksgiving dinner table, hey, you had a grandmother who was clear out in Colorado? And so I think that's probably, the faster we can find people who know her or knew of her, the more likely we are to find out what her real name is. Because searching through census reports and things are difficult without having a good last name. Yes.
Now, you said the Fort Collins paper said it started with a light. Did
Leitenberger. We did. We've researched that too. The problem with Wilson is it's such a common name,
right,
that we can find numerous Elizabeth Wilsons, both in Philadelphia area and some in the Lancaster area.
I think the other name would be
much easier to find,
right,
and is a German name, and is also in both of those communities. You
oh,
believe it or not. And then you start to say, well, who are we looking for? I don't think. Again, this is just our hypothesis. I don't think she was married. I think most of the maids that came out here were probably unmarried young women, because to have a family meant you had to house the family. Mm-hmm. And then if they got pregnant, you had to give them leave to have the child. And so it was probably just easier at that time if they hired a staff that was unmarried women to work as maids. But I don't know that, but we're going in that direction. The second thing is, because most of the papers contrast the wait staff that was injured and call them African American and don't mention that for Elizabeth, that tends to take me in the direction of perhaps she was white, because with the name Leitenberger, that's very much a Caucasian, again, a German name. The name Wilson is both African American and white. And then where would she be in 1910 for a census taker? Would she be back in Pennsylvania area, or would she be out in this area working? And so when we look here for her, we don't find any Elizabeths in Estes Park, but maybe the staff at that time wasn't considered important enough to count, or maybe the census taker didn't even, because they weren't residents of this community, they were only working here in the summertime. So was she in transit, and so is she on any census? And then if she got married, if she was after this injury, if she recovered and got married, then she's going to have a different last name than any of those possibilities, than Lambert or Wilson or Leitenberger. So it's a puzzle, and it's the kind of puzzles that we kind of take up with gusto frequently. And sometimes we have success, and in any event, we learn a lot more about our history in Estes Park, even if we go down a different path. With the Lamborn path, where we found family, one of a member of their family that married into the Lamborn family worked for the American Museum of Natural History and came out to Estes Park frequently to take photographs. And so these are from the 1910s and 1920s, and they're of the Stanley Hotel in some cases. So what a remarkable thing that we can get back, because the Stanley Hotel after its opening, was the premier hotel in Colorado, because it was such a fancy place. And so many dignitaries and people came from all over the United States out here. So they hosted a presidential candidate in 1916. They had big conventions every year. So it was the place to, see and be seen. And so just for that reason alone, to get any kind of information or any kind of family members that were related to the manager will be so important for our history back here.
Well, with Elizabeth, what a mystery to be solved.
Yes, and because she figures so prominently on the ghost tour, because the paranormal people think she comes back and visits that room or cleans up that room where the explosion occurred.
Whether she actually died or didn't die in the explosion.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be nice to know, so that we could be giving people who take the tours a little more information about her, so that, and when we come and look for her, that we know we're looking for the right person, that we know, again, African American or white, young, older, married, unmarried, all those things will help add to their tour as well.
Well, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing again. Boy,
Thanks.
your stories, I could listen to them all day.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully you'll come and we'll get to speak with you again.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Anytime. Thanks,
John
Christy.
Meisner with Estes Park Archives. You're listening to EstesParkRadio.com.